Hi stitchy friends, it is Bess from Life with Bess and welcome to the pattern tutorial for June's Pattern Club design, Widely Capable. First things first, we're going to prepare our hoop and fabric ready for stitching. This design we're going to use some really beautiful purple Devonstone cotton and my wooden hoops. There is a tutorial which goes through this in a lot more detail in my embroidery basics playlist. If you need, there is a card link at the top there. Just remember to pull that fabric nice and tight. It should sound like a little drum when you tap it. Then we're going to transfer our design. My preferred transfer method is to use my iPad and a Pilot friction pen. I like to use an app called Trace Table, which locks my screen so I can trace it without the design moving. I also have a detailed tutorial on this and some other methods that you could use on my embroidery playlist as well. Then just when we're transferring our lettering, we're going to be really careful when we do it, just because this is a really delicate and detailed text that we're transferring, so we just want to make sure that it is absolutely perfect. And then what we're going to do before we start stitching is just flip that design around the other way. It just makes it a little bit easier for filming. You can totally keep it the way that we had it when we transferred. I get this question a lot. It is just personal preference. Normally I would just start stitching and have my hoop backwards, but in this case when I am filming I get weird shadows if I do that, so I always make an effort to turn it around the right way. I will say if you are going to be doing this, just really work on it gradually to make sure that the design isn't warped or sitting weird once you've transferred and stretched the fabric again, and then you are ready to start stitching. The first lot of stitching that we're going to do is for the stems and then the leaves on this wreath that's on the left hand side of the design. Originally I was going to have a wreath all the way around the hoop, but I ended up deciding just focusing it on that left side just to feature the text in the center a bit more. For the stem, because I want this section to be really like delicate and dainty, again I'm just using a single strand of thread in the green color and I'm using stem stitch. This is my favorite stitch for stems, hence why it is called stem stitch, I am sure, because it gives a really nice twisted effect and it's very smooth to create lines for your stems. Once all of the stems are done, it is time to move on to stitching the leaves. Now these leaves are quite small, but I have bumped up to using 3 strands so it has a bit more body to it, but I'm only going to be using satin stitch. I don't need to use leaf stitch or anything like that because they are quite small. I end up filling them with stitches really quickly. So what I do is I start with a stitch through the center and go about halfway to 3/4 of the way down, and then I just do a stitch from either side to the very bottom tip, and I find this gives a really nice shape and size for the leaves. As you can see, there is a lot of leaves in this design, so it does take a little bit of time, but I really love the effect that they have when they're all coming out from the stems and branching out. So once you've finished all the leaves, it is time to move on to stitching the daisies. As I said before, this design is relatively simple, so we're only going to be using one style of flower and one color of thread. So we're taking this neutral color and we're going to stitch the petals on each of the daisies. So I'm just using satin stitch here, but I'm just doing the slight modification so that I can get that nice teardrop shape. So rather than doing parallel stitches to each other, we're all going to focus them in towards the center so we get that kind of nice fanning out that shows the shape of the petals. So you're just going to do satin stitch for each of the petals, and then we're going to be filling in the centers. This is my favorite way to do petals, doing this type of satin stitch. I just really love the finished effect it does. And then when we're moving onto the center, we're just going to be using straight stitch or a couple of satin stitches just to fill those centers with this really nice yellow color. Now that we've finished stitching the wreath, it is time to move on to the lettering. So we're going to start off with the script font. I get a lot of questions, what stitch should I use? Do you have any tips and tricks? So my number one tip for this really fine font that I'm doing here is to use a single strand of thread. That really helps show the delicate nature of the stitch. And then my number 2 tip is to, when you are trying to get a smooth curve as you are stitching, you need to do smaller stitches. So for this particular script font, I am using split stitch because I want a really smooth finish. And then as you can see here, I'm using my needle to kind of get the thread in the position that I want it to be so that I am getting that really nice smooth line. When I get to a curve or a tight curve, like for the top of the E or for the corner of the R, I do shorter and smaller stitches so that I have better control over the angle that my thread is going. Now when you are at the back, my number one tip is that you stop and start in between each of the letters or words. I can do words in this case because it is joint script font, and that just means you don't get any shadowing showing through from the back to the front of your words joining together. Moving on to the more block fonts, I chose to use long and short stitch for this type of font just because I really wanted to showcase the differences in the thin sections and then the thick sections of the font. What I did find helped a lot was to actually do an outline of the letter first using split stitch, exactly like we did for the script font, and then coming in and filling out the sections that need to be thickened up a little bit using the long and short stitch. Just go nice and slow. When you're doing lettering, to get it accurate and get the detail that you are after, you have to go slow and you have to be really pedantic about where your needle is going into the weave of the fabric. You can see as I'm coming down here, I'm going to do that little corner kick out bit. I'm sure it has a proper name. If you're a font designer, I'm very sorry, I don't know the name, but I actually ended up doing a stitch that went across horizontally, and that just kind of created this nice little framework for me to get that little section nice and even. My other tip is just use your thumb to kind of position the thread where you want it to be. Use your needle to kind of angle it where it needs to be, and that's how you get a really clean section of lettering on your hoop. Once you are happy with the letter, just go in and just tweak it, the position where you want it to be. Make sure those threads are all sitting nicely. Once you have finished all the lettering, you'll notice with the black thread that there will be little fibers of black thread everywhere that shows up on the fabric. So I recommend just getting some tape and doubling it over and then just patting it to pick up any of those loose little thread fuzzies. And then you are ready to remove your pen markings. This is my favorite part of the process. I am using my hair straightener, my trusty hair straightener. And then once that is done, you can back your hoop in your preferred way. Thank you so much for joining me on this pattern tutorial. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment. Make sure you are subscribed, and I cannot wait to see you next time. Happy stitching.